to the Home Secretary, Alan Johnson.
In March last year, my predecessor commissioned the Advisory Council to provide advice on so-called legal highs or new psychoactive drugs. Following receipt of its advice, we have banned a number of substances, including synthetic cannabinoids such as spice, BZP and GBL. As a priority, I'm now expecting advice from the ACMD on the cathinone group of drugs, including Mephedrone.
Mr. Robert Goodwill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Home Secretary share my concern that the purveyors of these pernicious preparations can often be one step ahead of the authorities, either by reformulating the molecules slightly or by marketing them as, for example, plant food?
I do, Mr. Speaker, and that's why I think it's very important to get a generic classification so that we can cover whole areas and not allow the manufacturers of these drugs to actually shift around. We can actually make illegal a whole range and a whole classification of these drugs.
Mr. David Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is growing concern in North Wales over the increasing use of Mephedrone, which, as the Secretary of State knows, is a substance related to ecstasy, but which is readily available on the internet, where it is marketed as plant food. And children as young as 14 years old are reported to be using it. He has mentioned that he's expecting a report from the Advisory Council on the group of substances that includes Mephedrone. Can he say when he expects to receive it?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I spoke to Professor Les Iverson, who's the new chair of the ACMD, last week. This is a priority for them, an absolute priority for them. They expect to be receiving the advice on the 22nd of February. Thereafter, they expect to make a decision in early March. So it is a priority. They're moving as quickly as they can, consistent with the point I made earlier of trying to ensure that they're not just dealing with Mephedrone, they're dealing with the whole generic group so that we can't be fooled by the manufacturers shifting around.
Dr. Brian Idden.
Mr. Speaker, but as we consider substances containing the cathinone group of chemicals, which includes cat, by the way, used by people from the Horn of Africa, isn't there a danger that as we put more and more substances into the ABC classification, we merely displace the problem? There is an endless list of chemicals and natural products which chemists can supply onto this market, and isn't there a danger also of displacing illicit drug users to using products in the legal market?
Mr. Speaker, I accept that there may be a danger. That's why the ACMD, of course, is not just composed of scientists, it's composed of others, including police officers, including people from law enforcement agencies, etc. I think it's very important that I take their advice, and their advice will be much wider than just the classification. It will also look at the kind of issues that my honourable friend raises.
James Brokenshire.
Professor Les Iverson, the interim chairman of the ACMD, has said, is quoted this morning, that it is quite a scary scenario that school children are able to buy legal highs like Mephedrone over the internet and take them freely. Professor Iverson wrote to the Home Secretary on the 22nd of December, advising that the selling of Mephedrone in a form that it is clearly unintended, as we've heard, could have, in his words, serious public health implications. What action has the government taken in response to Professor Iverson's advice?
Mr. Speaker, Professor Iverson's advice is in the context of the work of the ACMD. His letter to me on the 22nd of December pointed out that that is why this is their priority. We'll receive their advice and their guidance before we take action. That's the correct sequence of events.
David Davis.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We introduced the points-based system for students in March of 2009. We estimate that around 2,000 colleges have ceased offering courses to overseas students as a result. Our review of Tier 4 is aimed to close down the consequential attempts to gain entry to the UK for non-student purposes.
David Davis.
Mr. Speaker, apart from language schools, colleges offering legitimate degree courses and other courses would be expected to have a high proportion of British nationals. The Home Secretary and his ministers could almost certainly find many dubious, bogus colleges by simply investigating those with a surprisingly high number of foreign national students on their rolls. Why won't he do so?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have done so, and we do so. As I said in my answer, we estimate around 2,000 colleges have had to withdraw or courses for overseas students or close. Of course, previously there wasn't a sponsor licences system, and the great advantage of the points-based system is that we can now hold not just the student to account, but the sponsor as well.
Maris.
My understanding is that across the subcontinent, in places like Chandigarh, Jalandhar, Nepal and New Delhi, UK Border Agency has temporarily ceased processing Tier 4 student applications because of the huge volume of work. When will reprocessing recommence?
My honourable friend is right. Precisely because we have the new system, we can monitor to see where we think there may be abuse, and we have had to suspend Tier 4 applications in 3 such posts. We will be reopening those for applications as soon as possible, and we intend to lay our the findings of the new review as soon as possible.
Chris Grayling.
Can I ask the Minister, back in November he said, and I quote, "We have clamped down on student visas now and we have a much better system." What's changed since then?
Well, the honourable gentleman is quick to criticise the points-based system. It's precisely because we're able to close down the bogus colleges by having the sponsored licensing system that people who then wish to abuse our hospitality then look for other methods to gain entry into the United Kingdom. And he should know, Mr. Speaker, that controlling the borders is a constant campaign against those who wish to abuse our system, and that is what we are doing, and I would welcome his support in that endeavour.
Chris Grayling.
Well, 3 months ago the Minister said we have a much better system. There will be obviously a suspicion that the government is simply delivering pre-election rhetoric over an area that has widespread concern. So let me test the Minister on the substance of these proposals. Yesterday he announced that people on student visas would now be allowed to work only 10 hours a week and not 20. So can you tell the House how many students have actually been prosecuted for working more than 20 hours a week?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman drafts his questions based on a press cuttings service. It's clear that is not either what we said nor indeed what the press reported, but let me assume it is, just for his benefit. The proposals relating to the dependencies and work times are for those at sub-degree level, as has been urged on us by some people. But I repeat the point, and I would seriously ask him to support the government in this endeavour. Otherwise, he will be accused rightly of being more interested in criticising the government than in providing a robust immigration system. We closed down the bogus colleges, around 2,000 of them, and there are attempts by some with bad intentions towards our country to get round that, so we've had to review that again.
Baker.
Free, Mr. Speaker.
The government keeps all legislation under review.
Norman Baker.
I'm most grateful for that thorough answer, but can I point out to the Minister that of the 19 acts of Criminal Justice Acts introduced since 1997, there are 68 sections and 25 schedules not yet fully implemented. And of those thousands of new criminal offences that have been introduced, many are ludicrous or unnecessary, such as offering for sale a game bird caught on Christmas, killed on Christmas Day. When is this government going to actually stop its knee-jerk reaction that every time a problem arises, a new law is required, and have a policy of removing unwanted and unnecessary legislation?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for reminding us of the number of criminal justice acts this government has put through. And perhaps amongst the legislation that the honourable gentleman would wish us to review was, for example, the Criminal Justice Act of 2003, which brings in new evidence for serious crimes, for sentences for murder, sexual and violent offences, DNA, fingerprints, bringing 37 killers and rapists to justice, or perhaps the Antisocial Behaviour Act of 2003, which gave power to close crack houses, because the Liberals voted against both of those bills at third reading. And I'm sure that the honourable gentleman would find a way to remove many of those issues, because ultimately the Liberal record on crime has been very soft on crime, Mr Speaker.
Dennis McShane.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. But can I welcome the fact that in recent years we've had up to 90,000 people charged with hate crime, crimes of racism, of anti-Semitism, of attacks on gay people, with conviction rates of up to 80%. I think that's making Britain a more decent and fairer place. And I do wish the Liberal Democrats would stop rubbishing efforts to bring a bit more justice to many areas where we have an unjust society.
Well, indeed, Mr Speaker, every Liberal Democrat member of this House has lower crime than in 1997, has more police officers than in 1997, and has more resources to tackle crime in 1997. And the bills that we brought